Believing that you're destined for heaven when you're not would be the most tragic self-deception. David Servant's book, The Great Gospel Deception, will help you be sure that heaven will be your eternal home. Order your copy at heavenword.tv.
All right, welcome back. We are now in Matthew chapter 26. I want to just back up and read one verse that we skipped over before because it leads into the context of what was happening during Jesus' mock trial before the Sanhedrin. Matthew 26:58. But Peter was following him at a distance as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And entering in, he sat down with the officers to see the outcome. Now, if you've ever taken a tour of Israel and visited Jerusalem, which of course would be included in the itinerary, more than likely they've taken you to some ruins that are thought to perhaps be that of this house of Caiaphas. And in that house, they've excavated stairways that go down into a compartment, actually a dugout cave that perhaps originally was a cistern, but it's thought that it was also a place where criminals could be held. And up higher above that, there's some evidence that it was a place where people would be scourged because of the markings on the stone walls and where chains would have been attached and so on and so forth. So they normally take you down into that hole, and it's got, of course, electric lights now, and then they'll take you there, and then they'll turn the switch off so you get a little taste of utter, complete, total darkness. And try to imagine what it would have been like for Jesus had he been lowered into that hole. And again, in Christ's day, it's thought that there was not access that has been created later to get to that hole for tourists, but it was just a hole that he would have had to been lowered through by ropes to be held, incarcerated, waiting for the next day. It's all speculation. We don't know, of course, exactly what time Jesus was arrested in the garden, how long the trial went on. John tells us he was first taken to Annas' house and then to Caiaphas' house. The synoptics don't include that. We don't know how long the trial went and so forth. And so, again, we don't know. But it is cool to think you're walking in the footsteps of Jesus. There's actually a stairway there they've excavated, and they're pretty sure it dates back to the time of Christ, making it likely that he himself walked up those stairways. And you get a really, interesting feeling and thought as you hike up that stairway to think, wow, Jesus' feet could have touched these very stones that I'm walking on now. Okay, all that being said, now, after Matthew describes Jesus' trial, he backs up in time because simultaneously Peter is waiting out in the courtyard to see what's going to happen. And here is when his story begins, which we're all so familiar with. In Matthew 26 and verse number 69, now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him and said, "You too were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you are talking about." Well, it's an out-and-out lie. But of course, in his own self-interest to protect his life, he feels an obligation to lie. But he's fulfilling what Jesus foretold that he would do. And beginning in verse number 71, then, when he had gone out to the gateway, another servant girl saw him and said to those who were there, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again, he denied it with an oath. So this time, wow, he's using that old technique to try to make people believe you by saying, "I swear by the temple," or "I swear by God." And we don't know what his oath was, but he ended with, "I do not know the man." Verse 73. A little later, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Surely you too are one of them, for even the way you talk gives you away." Apparently there was a Galilean accent that people from up north had that distinguished them from the people down south in Judea and Jerusalem, and they were using that as evidence against Peter. But again, he's going to deny it. It's interesting that John's gospel tells us that the person who makes this third accusation among those bystanders who make the third accusation as recorded in Matthew was a relative of the slave whose ear Peter cut off. And was actually there in the garden, because he said, I saw you in the garden, is basically what he says. And that's when Peter makes his third denial. All right. And Matthew records it in verse number 74. Then he began to curse and swear. Well, he was a fisherman and a sailor, so I'm sure he had quite a vocabulary. I do not know the man. And so he's, trying his best to convince them, not with just an oath this time, but by cursing and swearing and getting angry and putting on a big show for them. And that's his third denial. And immediately a rooster crowed. Mark actually records 2 roosters crowing, I think because Mark recorded that Jesus said, the cock won't crow twice before you deny me 3 times. And it's interesting that Luke records Peter's third denial when the rooster crows. This is from Luke 22 and verse number 61. He was within eyeshot of Jesus at that point in time. And so we read this very provoking phrase in Luke 22. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. And so, oh my goodness, the sword that must have gone through Peter's heart at that point in time, realizing I've just denied that I know him 3 times, just like he said. And I did it to preserve my own life. As I boasted, I was willing to go to prison or to death for him. What a wretch I am. And so that's why Peter goes out and weeps bitterly. Matthew 26 and verse number 75. Peter remembered the word that Jesus spoke, before a rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. And he went out and he wept bitterly. Well, I take heart in knowing the end of this story. It makes me feel much better. And I'm actually so glad it was recorded. And I'm actually thankful in kind of a strange way for what Peter did there, because I think as a follower of Christ, I've made my blunders as well at times in self-interest. And we've all maybe to some sense, to one degree or another, denied the Lord. Isn't it nice to know that after Jesus confronted Peter later on, after his resurrection, they were reconciled, and then God used Peter in a marvelous way. That's the power of God's grace. I love it. I love talking about it. We'll talk about it next time. See you then.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.